depending where you are on the planet. Welcome back on our fifth day of this great seminar. This is our second annual George Danis seminar on security and diplomacy in the Eastern Mediterranean. And this year's seminar has been focused on the issues of climate and energy as the wicked challenges of the region and of our time. And the last couple of days, we are trying to focus even more on the specifics as we started out a journey last Monday with a bigger scope picture when we started out with Professor Bechev and Mr. Chafos giving us a security and economic purview. And then we moved to different areas as we moved through the Balkans and places like the Black Sea and in Greece in particular. And we also explored the Greek-Turkish debate and the Greek-Turkish dispute and how that really filters through, even from the perspective of the United States, but always in mind the issues of energy and climate. And yesterday, in the afternoon sessions, from the mid-session to the afternoon session, we had a really focus on the issue of energy, and we also focused on the issue of climate with two really outstanding presentations, just like the previous ones. But I thought yesterday afternoon, so the presentation in the afternoon with Ms. Soku and Ms. Miliu, who are both from different parts of the world, but they really look at the issues of climate and sustainability, either from somebody on the ground or somebody who writes about it and also thinks about it and really looks at the policy perspectives. So today we're going to continue on that conversation, and we have an excellent panel this morning, which I'm honored to introduce, and also really let you know that this entire project has been undertaking in collaboration with the Karamanlis Chair at the Fletcher School, with the Institute of International Relations of Pantheon University, the American College of Greece in Diri, and the National University of Public Administration and International Relations in Romania. And of course, with the support of Georgie Danis and the great contributions to the 12 or 15 students who are participating in this for credit, and every other participant that has come in throughout the week. And I also see Ambassador Garcevich on board, and I couldn't do it without Ambassador Garcevich and everybody else that has supported us throughout this entire process. Well, today, the topic of the panel was actually selected by our panelists, and it's the Eastern Mediterranean through energy, water, environment, nexus glasses. And there are two panelists also have a distinguished record on this issue. And for a long, long time, this is not a new issue. This is not an issue du jour, so to speak, but something that they have thought about, wrote about, and acted upon. And we have with us Mr. Dimitris Dolis, who is a former Deputy Foreign Minister of Greece from 2010 to 2012. Mr. Dolis is a scholar and expert on Middle East and African affairs. He has served as Secretary General of the Greek Foreign Ministry from 2000 to 2004. And in 2009, he was sworn as Ambassador at Large and Special Envoy. During this period, he was heavily involved in strategic issues of Greek foreign affairs, and especially Greek communities in the diaspora and special operations, among other places, in Yugoslavia, Sudan, Afghanistan, Egypt, Libya, and Lebanon. So very well traveled in this region. Prior to his return to Greece from Australia in 1999, at the invitation of Prime Minister Papandreou, Mr. Dolis had a political career in Australia, where he served as elected deputy leader of the opposition in Australia's Victoria Parliament until the end of 1999. Mr. Dolis is a graduate of the Universities of Monash and Melbourne and received an adjunct professorship from La Trobe University. He is recipient of several awards, and he has written extensively on globalization, race, foreign affairs, and ideology. He's married to Nikki and a father of 2 children. We also have with us Ambassador retired Ram Aviram, an old friend and a great contributor to our efforts in the past. Ambassador Aviram specializes in hydro diplomacy. His experience is based on over 35 years of multilateral and bilateral diplomacy, while serving in high-ranking positions at the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, also as Chief of Staff in His Excellency Simon Peres and Ambassador to Greece. His career at the ministry was highly connected to hydropolitics and water-related issues. His responsibilities included Director of Water and Environment Department and Head of Israel's negotiating team on water issues within the framework of the multilateral peace process. He participated in numerous international forums and multilateral negotiations on environment and water issues between Israel and its neighbors. He retired in 2006 and established the BIT consultancy, which is providing hydro diplomacy consulting services. BIT is the geopolitical consultant for the Rehabilitation Administration of the Lower Jordan River. BIT has given services, among others, to multinationals like Tetra Tech in the context of the Dead Sea Water Project, NGO like SIWI in building capacity on cross-boundary negotiation strategies for governments like Namibia, think tanks like AIX, and establishing novel ideas for Palestinian-Israeli water conflict resolution. He is a guest lecturer at the Tel Hai Academic College, at the postgraduate program, and at UNESCO Chair Connect at Eastern Macedonia and Thrace Institute of Technology. He lectures often in other forums, among others, the Institute of Foreign Relations of Athens, Virginia University Darden Business School, Texas A&M University Law School, School of Law, and College Station. He is a graduate of TEFT, MIT Special Water Diplomacy, and UEA, Water Security Seminars. He is writing often on cross-boundary water issues. His publications include Desalination as a Game Changer in Transboundary Hydropolitics and the International Hydropolitical Policies of Israel. So we are in for a treat this morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I yield the floor to Mr. Dimitris Dolis. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Doing a double act. Thank you for the invitation. And attempting to do a double act with Aviram is always a very difficult thing. He's an incredibly knowledgeable and very modest person. But Eastern Mediterranean, more than a century ago, the discovery of oil in the Middle East transformed the region. 100 years later, energy in the Eastern Mediterranean has not only changed it, but complicated politics in the Levantine Sea and has increased regional disputes. According to a US geographical survey, the Eastern Mediterranean basin is estimated to contain gas worth about $700 billion. And you can imagine what that means to a lot of people. The energy game changers have been many. Let us start with the 78 Camp David Accord, which ended the conflict between the two big nations in that area, militarily, industrially, and economically, that of Israel and Egypt. The discoveries of the Tamar natural gas field in 2009 and the Leviathan field within the Israeli exclusive economic zone in 2010 became the first big game changer. These discoveries clearly indicated that there was a great potential, energy potential, in the Levantine Basin. The Aphrodite gas field discovery by the Noble Energy Group in Cyprus attracted international attention and produced major policy developments. One of the first developments was the Cyprus-Israeli Energy Corporation, which began when Delek, an Israeli company, became a partner in the development of the Aphrodite field. Of course, Turkey, the regional belligerent player, immediately reacted by threatening to introduce a new security order in the Eastern Mediterranean and to produce a new diplomatic cooperation with a number of countries. But of course, that led to Israel, Cyprus, and Greece getting a lot closer. Turkey, since the collapse of the Berlin Wall, has attempted to become a major energy transporter, not only to Europe, but a player in the region. President Erdogan considers energy transit as a major tool in Turkey's foreign policy, and to achieve that foreign objective, he has concentrated his energies in the Eastern Mediterranean. And of course, he's using its strategic position to do that. Libya is one of the cases where this belligerent attitude and policy has been very obvious. From 2014 until the creation last year of the Dibaiba National Unity Government, Libya was split into two. This split was used by Turkey when the armed forces of General Haftar attempted to capture Tripoli in 2019, to enter and assist the government of Tripoli, the Sarraj government, and in return extract two bilateral agreements, both illegal, but he extracted them. One was the military cooperation agreement, and the other one, which concerns energy, is the maritime boundary agreement. The military cooperation agreement is there to keep him in Libya, interfere illegally in accordance with US decisions and US sanctions, and it is there to give him the ability to interfere with energy routes in the Eastern Mediterranean, and is claiming at the moment to have an exclusive economic zone in the Eastern Mediterranean. The Turkish-Libya Accord, both of them rather, are void and violate the international law area. Egypt's reaction to that was very simple and straightforward. It called it illegal and non-binding, and Israel said clearly that it jeopardizes peace and stability in the area. So in attempting to sort of find ways of cooperation and ways of maximizing the finds that exist in the Eastern Mediterranean basin, we have a player that comes and intervenes in a very belligerent way because it does not have access, legitimate access, to the waters of the Eastern Mediterranean. All that and Turkey's attitude produced the case of the East Med pipeline. What is the East Med pipeline? The East Med pipeline is if we think that energy security is very important for the EU, and if we think that the EU requires incredible amounts of energy, and the only supplier at the moment is Russia, and there is an incredible debate that is taking place and a vote is taking place in the Senate regarding sanctions on the new Nord 2 pipeline that will transport more gas to Germany from Russia. If we think that Russia is the only supplier, then it makes sense to think that another supply route can be found. Now, the East Med pipeline was thought out to be the alternative pipeline. Of course, it is an expensive project, but it is born out of the need to provide alternative energy sources to Europe. And it is a geostrategic proposition. And it makes sense as a geostrategic proposition because Europe will ensure that it has an alternative supplier and it is not dependent on one source, which is the Russian gas. At the same time, it is a very expensive project, like all projects that are. So the decision on the EastMed needs to be made when you put into the weighting scales the geostrategic proposition and the possibility of bringing nations together to ensure peace and stability in the Eastern Mediterranean, and the expense proposition. I do hope that at the end of the day, despite the fact that 10 years have passed since the beginning or since the idea was created, that at some stage the players, the EU and the regional players in the United States will agree that this alternative is required. Because without this alternative, there is no way of dealing with Russia when it comes to the supply of gas to Europe. And no sanction in terms of energy supplies to Europe will ever work because the needs of the EU and the needs of Europe are too great to be ignored. The contradictions of energy in the region are huge. If we go to Lebanon, we'll see that we almost have a basket case these days, a country that is economically on its knees, no energy, no electricity, and no ability to supply energy to the country unless the Hezbollah gets from Iran a shipment and more political instability is created. There we've got the contradiction of sanctions because there is an ability, and by the way, Turkey in Lebanon, through Car Powership, which is an electricity company, it has barges that go in and plug their electric generators and provide electricity to countries from Lebanon to Cuba, Africa, and everywhere in the world. Car Powership provided 24% of Beirut's electricity for the past 8 years. It stopped recently when the crisis was at its peak because it claimed that 100 million as payment was due to it and has created an even bigger crisis. Our response, the West's response, was maybe we can use the Arab gas pipeline to pipe and pump gas from Jordan and Egypt. But there is a problem. There is the CISA Act, what is called the CISA Syrian Civilian Protection Act of 2019, that put sanctions on the Syrian government, which include the Arab gas pipeline. Therefore, the difficulty of the sanction means that the only supplier to Lebanon, in the absence of any new ideas, can be Iran, which means Hezbollah increases its ability to maintain its control in Lebanese politics. So the contradictions are immense when it comes to using energy as part of geopolitics. And the Eastern Mediterranean is the clearest example. Running through very quickly, what do we need? Cooperation. What does cooperation mean? The prospects of energy cooperation in the Eastern Mediterranean at the moment are very, very small. Turkey continues to be belligerent and it continues to promote not only in the Middle East, excuse me, but in Africa, a neo-Ottoman expansionist politics. Israel, a stable democracy, and Egypt, after the stability that the Sisi government has provided, are beginning to produce a way of nations cooperating by using gas or energy as a means. Greece, and in particular Prime Minister Mitsotakis, has been working hard to turn the East Mediterranean into a sea of peace and stability, despite Turkish attempts to the contrary. And the threats are many. Lebanon is unstable today, and this instability could create problems. A small projection on Lebanon, if we're not very careful, it could become another Libya in the area, and we know how much we have paid in terms of Libya for the last 10 years. The military conflicts in the area are many, but the question that need to be answered is what strategies are required in this very fragile Eastern Mediterranean Sea to develop a multinational and a multilateral cooperation so that energy can bring peace and prosperity. The money is, there's a lot of money. There is a lot of ability to develop economies in the region. There is a lot of ability to use the finds, be it gas or oil, in order to develop nations that at the moment need development, and in order to feed people that at the moment are starving. Lebanon is a good case. At the same time, if Turkey continues with its current attitude to expand at the expense of others, and in particular in the Eastern Mediterranean, the prospects of achieving this peace, this development, this prosperity are becoming very small, and the outlook becomes very optimistic. Conflict resolution leads to peace and prosperity, but threats and expansionist foreign politics can also lead to military confrontation, and we see it everywhere, from Ukraine to just about everywhere. And even in the case of Ukraine, energy is the fundamental reason for that conflict. Now, energy finds in the Eastern Mediterranean are large. What do we do with them? If we don't use them to provide stability in the region, then the ability to use them for development and prosperity become too small. The post-COVID world will require a huge repair work to be done. We have not started to imagine what it means to reconnect the supply lines. Those in the production, those that have factories that produce and are interconnected internationally will clearly know what I mean when it comes to having a broken delivery line. A clear example these days is in the car manufacturing industry, where the chips that are required are not coming up in the amount, and the debate is countries beginning to develop that. So the post-COVID world requires huge repair work. It is not a luxury for the Eastern Mediterranean countries to be in conflict that they can afford. That luxury is not there. So my proposition is, it is about time that the international community, because the regional powers have decided to confront Turkey's expansionist belligerent politics, but it is about time for the international community to put stop to this interference, to utilize the 700 billion plus resource that is there, and begin to develop the world in the future in a way where a region where for the last 100 years has been unstable because of regional conflict suddenly can become an example of stability, growth, and prosperity. If we don't do that, I think the damage that COVID has done to the economies around the world will not be repaired, because the ability to have a stable environment and grow and connect will disappear. Thank you.
Thank you. Quite the presentation, giving us a very nice overview of the challenges and the difficulties, and also what the prospects might be. So thank you very much, Ambassador Abraham. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure being here again. It's an honor for me to talk after Dimitri, trying to make use of what was presented by Dimitri and take it maybe to a couple of other different directions. Let me share my screen with you, and I will do it right now. Hope you can see my first slide. Can I keep on? Petros, yes. Can you see my slide?
Yeah, all set.
Bravo. Okay, so what I will try to show in the next 15 to 20 minutes, how water environment issues are tilting the geopolitics of our area. We know that energy, as we heard from Dimitris, is a major factor, but I think that environment, water, and of course what is connected to climate change is not less, and that many times support and escalate and quicken up whatever can be done in terms of the geopolitics. And of course, we are all, I call it the 1+3 plagues of the East Med. We are all aware of what is happening in with the pandemic, and this is not the place to add it on, even though I'm a great believer that the way governments are tackling that has to do a lot with the era, as Dimitri said, after the pandemic. But I would like to focus on three other plagues which are there. One is the reduction of water availability in the region, scarcity of water as an outcome of very, very many reasons. One of them is, of course, the climate change and what we expect as the reduction in perspiration in our area of around 30 to 40%, depends on where you were. The scarcity is because, of course, population growth throughout the area. We have less water available for more and more people in need. And last but not least, the overpumping of many things. If I take, for example, the salinization of the shore aquifers of Lebanon as an example where overuse brings to scarcity of water. So one is water. The second one is the other way around, the floods. We have seen in the last few years, as part of climate change, extreme weather phenomena, we have seen quite a few cases of flash floods that becomes, as I say, more often. And we would like to see how it happens. It is connected, of course, also to human activities such as deforestation, such as desertification processes. And if I add the third plug in, these are the wildfires that we see all over. Of course, we see it in California as well, but since we are dealing with the East Med, let's have a look and see what are the geopolitical consequences of that. I know that when we talk geopolitics, we usually talk about relations between countries and that, but I want to take this opportunity to take you a little bit in a different direction and say and use the old known quote of Henry Kissinger, who said that there is no policy, only domestic politics. He said it about Israel, of course, but this is very true in very, very many places. And what I will try to claim in the next few minutes is that by having climate change effects, we are seeing implication on stability and on people in power in the various countries. And when you put that together, you understand that changing leaders, changing governments has a great influence on the overall geopolitics and the power shift in our region. Let's start with Turkey. Turkey is only an example, of course. I don't know if you can also hear, but what we have here is one of those awful cases of floods, flash floods happening in northeast Turkey last July and August. I think that these are images that are really moving all of us. And these cases are being looked at by the Turks as an example of what happens if you are not ready to deal with climate change effects. So what you can see is that the overall environment in which people are living in is completely changing through the climate change effect. Now, if we are looking at the opposite of it, still in Turkey, this magnificent view, I think devastating view of the whole Turkish Riviera on the Mediterranean, the Antalya area being in flames is another example of climate change and environmental hazards. Now, when you put this together, you say, okay, we have to deal with it in the way governments usually deal with it, mobilizing the forces, giving compensation in order to soothe the criticism. But I think that when those things are accumulating and coming alongside in a place like Turkey, where you have a lot of economic problems, I don't have to tell you all, you are following it very well, then when one reads in the social media of Turkey, how is it that one of the world's 20th big economies was unable to afford itself to have one functioning firefighting aircraft, while the president owns fleet of certain jets, owns 2 billion euros. So what we see is how climate change effects that comes into through different disasters is influencing the, I would say, even the ability of Erdogan to call and remain in power. I'm not saying by all means that this is the case, which means that environment will bring Erdogan down. But what I say is that when it is accumulating with other issues, then it becomes a very serious thing. Now, if we move away, and I'm not doing the direct connections, but wildfires can look in a different way as well. Last summer, Greece suffered from wildfires. At a certain moment, there were more than 100 fires in one place. This is a kind of almost apocalyptic view on the island of Evia, thousands on thousands of inhabitants being evacuated. Again, climate change effect, a massive wildfire all over, people losing their places. In North Evia, the biggest island after Crete in Greece, very many farmers and villages lost their cases. Now, again, even in such cases, when of what we see here, the government is being judged on what is being and the way it is handling this. And the expectation of the people is to be ready that the governments will be able to tackle with it. Now, I don't mean in any way that this again can threaten, and personally, I believe that the government of Mitsotakis have handled the wildfire in a very efficient way. We have finished a summer of more than in which 56,000 hectares had been devastated, and Mitsotakis himself said that criticism, self-criticism should be done. However, since they have decided that it is more important to save life, then they have stand to the priority that they have put. However, the Greeks have criticized them. And let me remind us that in two different other cases, one in 2009 at the time of Karamanlis, and in 2010 at the time of Tsipras, with the devastating disaster of the fire in Mati, where more than 100 people were killed. This was one of the reasons of governments to lose their power. So governments, when they are looking at climate change and disaster of that kind, should think also of the effect it has on their capabilities. And that is directly connected, of course, to the geopolitics, because the power of governments to handle that is many times reflecting on their ability to stand in the international arena. Now, I want to mention that the great difference between Turkey and Greece in that sense, and wildfire in general, were the ability to show solidarity and assistance. What you see in front of you are the 22 countries that sent in each and every one of them some contribution, physical one, either firefighters or firefighters' airplanes, whatever can be done in order to assist. And I would say right away that as Dimitri finished his presentation by calling for cooperation, then the wildfire in our region are definitely a very good example of possible cooperation. I remember very vividly when Dimitri was a deputy foreign minister, the group of Greek anti-fire airplanes that flew to Israel to assist it in one of its wildfires in the second biggest cities of Israel. And what we see now on the screen are very good examples how the geopolitics can build, unfortunately, but it is a need. And I can tell you that there is a great deliberation in many, many places on having, for example, a regional small anti-fire aircraft fleet that will assist the countries, that the airplanes will be procured together, will be maintained together, and you can see how Italy, Greece, Cyprus, Israel, at certain times, even a little bit to the north and to the east, assist each other by having the ability to work together and agreeing that. So on the plagues of floods and fires, we have understood how difficult it may be. However, when we come to scarcity of water, and I will talk a little bit of Iran, even though one would say, of course, that Iran is beyond the East Med, but I think that we can all agree that the position of Iran, its power, its influence from the relations, the difficult and of course animosity between Israel and Iran stands in mainly in Lebanon and in Syria, has major effect. Then let's see what happens in terms of scarcity of water. As I said, the scarcity of water is not necessarily only climate change, it is mismanagement, but Iran suffers from a great deal of water scarcity. And if we look at first of all, the idea that 28 million out of around the 80 million people are living in water-stressed areas in Iran. But if we are looking at this map and we see what happened in the last few years, when we had a water shortage and we had the extreme drought in the last few years. If you look at the left-hand side in the area of Khuzestan, we understand that there is a great problem within Iran. It's not only there, it is also in Tehran, where the table of water of the aquifer is being reduced dramatically, so much that there are areas of the city that are actually sinking in terms of the overall ground has been reduced. Now this, again, is causing the population to look at the way their governments and their regimes are handling it. And the Iranians went out to the streets, big time. And the Iranian regime used violence, including tear gas and, of course, also firing at the protesters. And you can see in places, the pictures, they are standing on a dry river because the water has been moved from one to a different place. So again, the regime in Iran that has to deal with so very many other problems, first and foremost, of course, the US sanctions and the terrible economic devastated situation, has to deal also with water. And this actually usually hits the poorest of them all. Now, if I would say that it is only Iran, you would say, okay, but this is not the case. Iraq and Syria are suffering from a devastated drought for the last few years, and usually it hits the poorest of the poorest. There is no way to have the cattle eat and drink. There is no way to pump water out of the aquifers. And if the table of the water in the aquifers has been reduced, then you have to put more energy. And if you need more energy to take it out, you need to pay more for the diesel. And if Dimitri Dolis mentioned the energy crisis in Lebanon, then one of the consequences was that there was not enough diesel in order to have the water system, the national water system work, and not enough for people to have diesel to pump water and water their fields. So it is there. However, water and water issues are not only an internal issue, but it is definitely also a transboundary challenge for many areas in our area. I would like to mention a couple of them, which is of major importance, and that the climate change is playing a major role there. One is, of course, the Euphrates that you are seeing in the picture in between Turkey and Syria. The last year's drought in Turkey made Turkey use more water in its area, as it happens in many other countries around the world where you are the upstream country, you are using more water. And Syria nowadays suffers from the reduction of the water in the Euphrates. The Turks at the time were trying to take upon themselves the commitment to have 500 cubes per second in the Euphrates in order to have enough water in Turkey. Unfortunately, in August 2021, it was reduced to 214 cubic meter per second, which is actually nothing. And if I remind you that we have enough proofs that the GAP project in Southeast Turkey and the Ataturk Dam and other major water operations in Turkey are one of the causes for internal migration in Syria, and we will talk about refugees in a minute, and actually to the civil war. But once we talk about water in a transboundary manner, we cannot overlook at what I think is one of the hotspots on our globe in many ways that has to do with water and water scarcity. This is the Nile that supplies 99% of the water needs of Egypt, the Nile that is the symbol of Egypt, the Nile that is giving Egypt between 8 and 10% of its power in the hydroelectric power station in Aswan. And this is the Nile that Morsi, the late president of Egypt, said by one drop of the Nile, our blood is the alternative. However, when we look at such issues and we look for a minute at this map, we see that Ethiopia, that is the origin of the Blue Nile, 85% of the water Nile, of the water of the Nile that is getting all the way to Egypt comes from the Blue Nile. Now, for thousands of years, as much as we are all thinking on the identification between Egypt and the Nile, then the Blue Nile and Ethiopia, the hegemonic position of Egypt over the Nile was also the right one that causes Ethiopia almost not to use the water of the Nile. However, Ethiopia has a growing needs. Don't forget that Ethiopia is 100 million people. Don't forget that Ethiopia is in a situation where its economy has to grow by 10% per year, and there is almost 40% of the population of Ethiopia suffers from lack of electricity. So for many years, Ethiopia did not materialize this legitimate need because of the hegemonic position of Egypt. And the late Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Menem, in the year of 2011, once the political chaos started in Egypt with the fall of Mubarak, Ethiopia started building the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam in order to make sure that there will be the biggest, by far, hydroelectric power station in Africa, and I think it's number 6 in the world. We're talking about 6,000 megawatt with a lake with an operational storage of around 70 billion cubic meter. One has to remember that Egypt received nowadays around 55 billion cubic meter of water from the Nile, so 74. This is a year and a half of the use of water in Egypt. It's a very massive one. And we are talking now about 2 seasons of fulfilling the lake. It is not yet really affected Egypt because these were very rainful years. However, we are talking about building the dam without an agreement with Egypt. And one of the questions that we all ask ourselves, how did it happen that Egypt has come to a situation where a dam is being built for the last 10 years, and yet it did not come into war, only intensive negotiations with Ethiopia, and of course Sudan is there. So I call upon you to look into this and understand the needs which are there, both needs to come to some sort on agreement. I want to wrap up. We talked about fires, we talked about floods, we talked about water, both internally with the example of Iran and internationally with the example of Syria, Turkey, and Ethiopia, Egypt. And I want to finish up by one of the consequences of all that, and that is, of course, refugees. And refugees in Jordan, mainly because of the civil war, but if one thing that this civil war, its root is in a climate change and drought and environmental reason, then in a certain way, those refugees that are now living in Jordan, they consist about 7% of the population. This is a huge number. And when we are talking about one of the poorest economies in the world, certainly one of the most poor countries when it comes to water, Jordan is in the top 5 countries with water scarcity, one or number 2 biggest refugee camp in the world, 80,000 people. This is a devastating situation. Now, Jordan not only have to take care of its own population when it comes to water, but now it has to give these 1.5 million people more water from resources that it do not have. Now, if there is something that is really put some question mark on the ability of the Jordanian government to keep on being a stabilizing factor as it is in our region, then the scarcity of water is, of course, one of them. Fortunately, I want to end up by saying a word of hope. We saw how the region can assist each other by having fighting fires with assistance to each other. I want to take you for 1 minute to November 21, just a couple of months ago, a very interesting agreement being signed between Israel and Jordan with the auspices of the United Arab Emirates after the Abraham Accords came into power. And of course, you see in the background also John Kerry, who is the special envoy of President of the US for environmental issues. And the basic element of this agreement is the following. Israel will desalinate and supply to Jordan another 200 million cubic meter of water per year. This it will be done in process of desalination, but of course, you know, when it comes to desalination, the US cannot bring more water, but the US can bring more money. And the UAE cannot bring more water, but it can bring more money. So Israel will build a desalination plant for Jordan on the Mediterranean and supply the water in the direction where Jordan can use it in Amman, where the water is mainly needed. And when we are saying 200 million cubic meter per year, and Israel will, starting this year, will supply, in any case, even before this agreement, 100 million metric cube of year, then Israel will supply around 30% of the needs of Jordan of fresh water. In return to that, and this is also an outcome of the more, I would say, awareness of climate change, Jordan will build a huge photovoltaic farms on its land, because in the desert you have vast areas that can be used, and will supply Israel. These solar power stations will be built for Israel purposes, and we're talking about a supply of about 1,200 megawatt per hour. This is now in, this agreement is now in the phase of a feasibility study, but I think it shows in a very vivid way how climate change and environmental issues can become an issue of cooperation, and in order to try to fight together all the needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And I like, you know, both our speakers end up in a positive note, and quite a comprehensive presentation and presentations together. You know, the fact that, you know, we went from all the way from the disasters that we were exposed to last summer, which made this issue of climate change. You know, we changed that second word to climate crisis as an awareness. And sort of like, we've spent a lot of time debating who causes and how it's caused and so on and so forth. And then we just are upon the major disasters, and none less than the disasters that led to even the civil wars and the civil unrest that we have witnessed in a greater level recently. And I also like the fact that we went from, which really focuses on what we have been talking about this week, that the area is not necessarily defined just by the pocket that's the Eastern Mediterranean, but it's defined by its connecting regions, going all the way to the Horn of Africa and to the Black Sea, and from Iran all the way over to beyond the Libyan deserts and into even like places like Morocco. So the question that for me is, to what extent, the points that were the last points that Ambassador Aviram makes as far as the positives, how we can come together, and what becomes the major divisive issue, if it's energy, as Mr. Dollar says, that really is at the core of everything that we are seeing, being torn apart from Ukraine all the way to Ethiopia. Then how much of this crisis then becomes the driver for cooperation? And yes, it has exposed all kinds of deficiencies, political deficiencies, unwillingness on the part of governments, or just complete nakedness in the ability to deal with the crisis. But now we are at the point of quite possibly having this tremendous crisis become a driver for cooperation. Is that the glimpse that we're seeing in what we saw with Ambassador Aviram mention of like the UAE, Israel, Jordan agreement? Is that a glimmer of hope, or is that just like some just passing thing altogether? And does it take the willingness of the United States? I mean, we talk about the Abraham Accords, and that's a top-down process from a president that came in and said, what, I don't recognize what we've been doing. Like, this is the way we're doing it. Here we are, like a year or so later, and the Abraham Accords become sort of like the foundational of peace there too. So,
if I can go first.
Yeah, sure.
Energy can be a curse, can be a blessing. Nations have to decide whether they want to be blessed or whether they want to be cursed. At the same time, we live in a globalized environment where we don't exist on our own. If you don't cooperate, you can't survive. So those that refuse to cooperate have to be dealt with. Nicely, if it is possible, not so nicely that if it is not possible. We can't continue to abuse something that nature has given us in order to be able to live better as human beings. That's what energy is. It is a source that can enable you to do a lot of things. But at the same time, it is a source that if it is sought to be manipulated by a nation or a group of nations, can become a curse. Is there a possibility for cooperation? Of course there is. Israel, Egypt, Cyprus, Greece, Italy, and the list is growing, are already deciding every day that is coming by that the fines that they've got in terms of natural gas or energy must be coordinated in order to get the maximum benefit. Secondly, we look at each other's weaknesses. Electricity supply. There is a line going through Greece to Israel that will supply electricity. Thirdly, old animosities are beginning to disappear. So if we don't use energy as a tool for good, to be simplistic, then energy will become a tool for evil. I don't think we've got too many options here. At the same time, the final comment I'll make is big powers like the United States will have to re-examine their decision-making and Lebanon at the moment is a perfect example. A decision made in 2019 that put sanctions on the Arab pipeline may enable, I will say will enable, Iran to become a major player in an area that Iran does not belong. Because Iran has a proxy called Hezbollah. Hezbollah is able to order a tanker of gas, which is easy for Iran, and go to the Lebanese people and say, here, I can do good for you. So at the same time, if we want prosperity, if we want cooperation, we also need to re-examine our policies and our priorities. And self-directed policies mean destruction for a lot of other nations. So yes, we can cooperate. Yes, we must cooperate. There is no other alternative but to do as a lot of nations have done.
Thank you.
I think that I would like to add a couple of factors that one should take in consideration. One, I think that leadership has a lot to do with it. And I think that both in terms of national leadership and in world leadership, that would somehow lead the nations and the area into directions of either cooperation or competition. And the second thing that I would like to say is that it's true that economically, I mean, part of the tension in the East Med over the energy is what Turkey believes it should have its own sources, and Greece says the other way around, and we are talking about the economic zone demarcation. My experience in the Middle East, and especially in my region, is that economical issues can be detract into a different way. And if you wish to use whatever is happening because of other reasons, hegemonic wishes, a way to irritate for other reasons, etc., then you can use these economic assets for that. But if your overall strategy is not to be hegemonic, but to be a partner to you, then you can take exactly the same economic assets and make them a reason to cooperate.
Yeah, I think that the political will, I think it's very, very important, and I think it's the conundrum that you raise even in your presentation, like the whole exposition as far as even the Turkish government, or in the recent fires, the whole idea that you only have one airplane or one aircraft for putting out fires, yet you have a fleet. In different ways, and then you're looking at it even in the choices, the bread and butter versus gun choices that governments make, because they are in that mindset, which really leads to a wider perspective as far as how do you change missiles into plowshares? How do we go through that and still have the political support to do it? With a very
that's true, Petros. That's true. That's true.
Yeah. So I see Mr. Danis, he has taken his microphone off, and I think you also said the magic word for him, which is leadership. So I think here is Mr. Danis, the floor is yours.
Good morning again, Ambassador Julius, Ambassador Avram. Thank you very much for the enlightenment and quite well analyzed and seen the history in the area that is so important to the world as of now, as of the future, is unknown, obviously. But the consortium of cooperation is a positive and a very important part of the future. And that really requires leadership. And I think you all cover that quite well. The energy areas of the world has been in an area that is a lot of conflict, a lot of civil wars, a lot of bickering, and unfortunately, they need to cooperate. And we also need an area that the United States, for instance, is really not using their leadership in an appropriate way, at least from my perspective. And of course, we have Russia, and has sort of put controls and some pressure in Europe because of the energy that they supply to them. So without the leadership and without the participation of citizens, we do have some conflicts going forward. We have growth of population, increase of supply, demand of supply of energy, water. We also have the technology communication, that all this happening quickly and everybody knows. And so we have 8 billion ideas and on the debate. It's a very important area that without the United States and at least the major powers, Russia that supplies energy, and of course China that consumes an abundance of energy or a big consumption of energy in order to fulfill their internal growth and economic prosperity. So how do we continue to build that cooperation? What's the magic word? What's the magic area that we need to focus as citizens? Because to me, there are two things. Is the citizens, if they were going to continue to survive, whether it is a totalitarian or a half democracy, whether it is run by the party or run by the citizens, is still somewhat getting elected by someone. And I think the party and the totalitarian government still has critical thinkers. So how do we convince the population, the citizens of the world, to start doing some demanding on the areas of energy consumption, climate deterioration, and to sustain the future? Thank you.
Well, if I can make a comment, the citizen has the power in a democracy to elect the government. It should also use the power to demand that the government deals with the contradictory policies that it produces. We can't have a situation that at the moment are talking about a possible war in Ukraine. We're talking about sanctions on gas that is important to Europe. We're talking about cooperation. But if we put it all together, at the same time we say, we don't want the EastMed pipeline to come in. If the EastMed pipeline doesn't come in, can you please tell me what other source have we got apart from Russian gas? So therefore, the citizen must demand the government that it elects in a democracy, that government must deal with the contradictory policies that it produces, because it affects people, it affects the environment, and it affects the way that we live. There is no other way but which we can do it. Power politics have changed in the post-COVID world. And if we don't understand the changes that are taking place, history can teach us what empires do. They rise and they fall.
We can't hear you, Ram.
Right. Of course, George, you're right. The most important thing is how we mobilize things. I think that when it comes to environmental issues, what we have seen in the world when it comes to Glasgow and Paris before and Tokyo beforehand is true in every country. You know, Israel, this nation, is ending 100 to 150,000 new cars to the roads that never will be sufficient for that number of cars. And you say, okay, you understand that if you are driving your private car, wherever you take it, you are destroying your own environment, you are destroying the environment of the world. But at the end of the day, the guy says, what do you want from me? I have to get to work. I want to take my children to the next nature reservation. So the ability on environmental issues to take upon yourself commitments, we all know the NIMBO, not in my backyard, of course, anything. This is a huge challenge, and you put your finger on the right thing, George. No matter if we are talking about democracies or more theocratic or more dictatorial states, this is in the very heart of human nature. And it's a huge challenge that, again, the word leadership has to do with it. I will never forget that how Glasgow as such collapsed when people start talking about the 100 private jets that brought the leaders of the world over there. And here are people sitting there saying, okay, guy, cut your use of carbons. Cut your, travel with your children to the next, to take your children to the kindergarten nearby. And they fly with more than 100 jets, private jets, to Glasgow. So, of course, I do not think that leadership is only the issue of giving an example, but it starts there.
Ram, I totally agree. And this is why I always try or believe that the citizenship, because even the most powerful or rich people in the world, they can be persuaded by the public opinion, the press. We all lack the will to do our jobs, or the fear to be outcast if we do our job. We haven't really taken the climate change, the consumption of energy vis-a-vis climate change very serious. Haven't been really given educational processes through schools, through every part of our society. And I totally agree. Listen to people that, one of the richest people says, I'm using green energy. Well, yes, nice, thank you. You can afford it. But what about the poor guy, the poor family that has to take their children to school? Thank you.
I see our Ambassador Garsovich has a question. So welcome this morning.
Thank you, Petros. Thank you to panelists this morning. I really enjoyed your presentations, and I learned a lot about energy dynamics and geopolitical dynamics in that part. In Eastern Mediterranean. I have, in fact, I have two questions. I will be short in my questions, given that we are running out of time. The first question is, you stress rightly the importance of cooperation in Eastern Mediterranean. But that said, how do you imagine getting Turkey on board? Because at the end of the day, that will be the question. You cannot develop the system without one of the biggest countries in the region being part of it. How you can imagine Turkey participating in that cooperative process? This is the first question. The second is, what is the role of China? And is China present? And if it is, in what way it is present? I know that China is, first of all, energy consumer and is looking for energy sources. But whether China is present in terms of soft loans, investments, projects in energy in this part of the world.
Well, if I can deal with the Turkey question, for as long as the international community enables Turkey to blackmail, be it refugees, be it energy, be it stability, be it whatever, be it a big base, which was there during the Cold War, Turkey will do what Turkey has done for hundreds of years. Expand, expand, expand at the expense of smaller nations. So Turkey can be dealt with. Turkey can become part of a rational international community following rational laws that are there to be obeyed. You can't argue that the UN is important and then at the same time the UN has an arms embargo in Libya, and Turkey is the first country that breaks it, but the UN is unable to take action against something that is continuing a conflict where thousands of people are dying. So Turkey is a question that nations must confront, and it's part of the policy difficulties that the international community needs to make, but a decision needs to be done. The contradictions have to be dealt. I can go on about Turkey, but I won't spend any more time. China. Let me give you an example. I evacuated lots of people from Libya when the crisis was on, just before the Gaddafi regime fell. I helped evacuate 13,500 Chinese workers that were working in Libya. China was in there working very hard, mining, oil exploration or whatever. Let me go to Beirut so you can understand it's returning. The port of Beirut was blown up. There are 4 bids to rebuild it. One is a German one. The other one is a French one. And of course, it's possible to, it's impossible. French is a major power there. The other one is a Turkish one. And the last one is the Chinese one. The Chinese one, possibly in economic terms, is the cheapest proposition. But geopolitically is not acceptable because it will get a base. The French one is possibly the most appropriate because Lebanon's connections to France. But here comes Turkey. The French company that is bidding in 2011 had a problem. In comes a Turkish company and buys 24% of that. And therefore, no matter what the result is, it will either be China or it will be a consortium that Turkey will be part of, because Turkey on its own will not be able to get it. So the contradiction is there. Let us decide in relation to your first question, what do we do with Turkey as an international community? Let us not say that for Germany it's important to use Turkey as an industrial base. For the United States to have used Turkey until recently in terms of military cooperation, for democracy to be a big issue for the new administration, but at the same time dealing with a country because of Syria, because of Libya, because of Lebanon, because of Ethiopia, because of a number of things called Turkey, and not deciding to deal with Turkey effectively. Putting sanctions on F-35s does not stop Turkey developing alternative mechanisms. Sanctions have proven that Northern Korea can develop ballistic missiles. What I'm saying is, if we're going to deal with contradictions in the post-COVID world, because COVID has taught us a lot of things about what do we require to do as nations, as an international community, not in order not to fall into the blackmailing of other nations, we will have to decide that the rules must be equal for everybody that participates. There can't be players that are exempted all the time. And Turkey has been an exemption in World War I, II, Cold War, and now.
Ambassador Aviram?
Well, time is very short, and I think that Dimitri actually put things in the right way. I would say only the following. We have to be very careful when it comes to China not to become a token in an overall, I would say, struggle between superpowers. And to make sure that the particular, I would say, interest of any of the nations in the East Med is being kept and not being captive in the other interest, which is not necessarily what they are. I will stop by that.
Thank you. There's one more question, and we'll address it. We'll try to hit as many questions as possible. This is from Mikhail Masautis, and the question is, EU had invested almost $1 trillion, 1 trillion euros so in green energy, while it produces less than 3% of its energy needs. East Med is canceled. The Greek government has stated that Greece will not try to extract hydrocarbons amid a global energy crisis that will not end soon. What is the future of Greece and the EU, I assume, within the energy conundrum?
Well, Greece is attempting with its limited resources to be a country of stability. In the last 12 months, Prime Minister Mitsotakis has made that abundantly clear that we want to use the Eastern Mediterranean as an opportunity for us to develop cooperation, to develop its resources in a collective way. Not everybody needs to dig their sea, their ground, in order to extract more gas, more this, more that. There has to be a coordinated way by which we do. Nations can be used to transport energy. Nations can be used to produce energy. Nations can be used to do a lot of things. The collective has the way forward. The individual nation does not. So what does it mean? Europe is very hungry for energy. It's very hungry for gas. Germany in particular. It will get it wherever it can. But at the same time, in the last 12 months, we have found that Asia comes in and is even hungrier as a result of what COVID has produced, and is offering prices that makes it almost impossible to buy cheap energy. So we've got a conflict. On one hand, we want to grow. On another hand, we want to have energy that enable us to grow. We want a clean environment, but we don't know how to stop cheap processing of electricity or of energy. And we are planning still without rules. The rules have changed and need to be put on the table as a cooperative mechanism where Ram Aviram does something and I do a reciprocal thing. Ram put it very clearly when he came to Israel and Jordan. We will give you desalination units, you'll get water, you'll give us our desert, and we will get electricity that we need. It's a simple example, but it is a way forward. Ram.
I feel that Dimitri expressed my feeling completely.
Well, I couldn't thank you both enough for a very enlightening and very thought-provoking conversation. Definitely speaking to the core of what we've been trying to do this week, and hopefully we've expanded the conversation a little bit, because I think, you know, the bottom line is that we need to create at least a buy-in on the individual level in order for us to mitigate and adapt constantly. Us in one part of the world, we have to mitigate our spending and consumption mania. And on the other side, we also have to be very accountable to our political leaders, make them accountable, and give them the vision that we want implemented as well. Couldn't thank you enough. I invite everyone to come back in about an hour and a half. We're going to have another great panel, this time from Cyprus and Israel, with two great colleagues, Professor Haritos and Professor Giaras, on the issues of, again, energy in the Eastern Mediterranean moving forward. Thank you again. Have a nice morning and afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.